Go ahead, Karnika.
Namaste and greetings. I, Karnika Arun, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Samsthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Learning. We are gathered for the 3-day online certificate training program on making Indian cities disaster and climate change resilient towards responsive and actionable urban planning, policy, and development. This training program is being organized by the National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India, in collaboration with IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Center for Environment, Climate Change, and Sustainable Development, New Delhi. This 3-day training program has an excellent panel of members who will be sharing their knowledge on the above theme. The patron for the program is Shri Taj Hassan, IPS Executive Director of NIDM, New Delhi. Our conveners include Professor Anil K. Gupta, Head of ECDRM, NIDM, New Delhi, Tikender Singh Panwar, former Deputy Mayor, Shimla, Senior Fellow at IMPRI, Dr. Simi Mehta, CEO and Editorial Director, IMPRI, New Delhi, Dr. Saumyadip Chattopadhyay, Associate Professor, Vishwa Bharati Shanti Niketan, Visiting Senior Fellow at IMPRI, New Delhi. The distinguished expert trainers for this program are Professor Chetan Vaidya, Himanshu Shekhar, Professor Sauvanik Roy, Professor VP Sati, Dr. Madhu Verma, Dr. Joy Elemon, Samir Unhale, Professor KK Pandey, and Bedoshruti Sadukhan. This training program is moderated by Shri Tikender Singh Panwar. The coordinators of the program are Dr. Shweta Vaidyadas, Dr. Kopal Verma, Fatima Amin, and Harshit Sharma, NIDM. Utkarsh Dwivedi, Diya Goswami, Priya Shah, and Karnika Arun from IMPRI. Before we start today's session, I would like to remind the housekeeping announcements once again. Join the meeting on time, ensure at least 80% attendance, 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A after each lecture. Share your questions on Q&A box only and not on the chat box. The questions must not be posted on as an quote-unquote anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise, refrain from making general comments. Now I invite moderator Tikender Singh Panwar to initiate the program and invite Anil K. Gupta for his initial remarks. Sir.
Thank you so much, and it's indeed a pleasure to be here for this 3-day workshop on disaster management, resilience, and all those adaptation strategies that we talk about. I thought Professor Gupta will speak first, and then I'll just start the moderating part. So I think Professor Gupta, before I make my remarks, because you are there, so I would suggest you just initiate the proceedings, and then I can take on the floor and ask our panelists to discuss and maybe make a very small comment, about what we intend to do with this workshop. So yeah, over to you, Professor Gupta. I think it will be better that you initiate the discussion. Yes.
So thank you. Very good morning to all. So happy to see the learned panelist on this very important theme. My dear friend Tikender ji is here, and Dr. Vaidya. And in fact, a lot of discourse going on nowadays that how do we look at our cities. And NIUA under the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs have been undertaking a lot of good initiatives, smart city Climate Resilience Smart City Assessment Program, a framework of which I am also a member. NIDM is also participating. And Tech Energy, one of the vibrant, I would say, the advocate of the urban resilience issues, because he comes from Shimla, and Shimla has been experiencing, and a number of case studies are also there around the country on various aspects of city resilience. And other speakers and the members from IMPRI and NIDM, who are organizing this very important 3 days dialogue on city resilience in the wake of climate change and disasters. So I have a couple of points as kind of a just to flag the issue for following discussions or whatever you say. One is that when we talk about the resilience of Indian cities, I find that Indian cities are little different than when we look at the cities around the world, and more particularly in the developed countries, and very especially the expansion side of the story. The way Indian cities expand, and very frequently we need to redraw the city boundary, and the peri-urban areas, and then the rural areas, and even the cities expand and villages remain within the cities. So the issues of urban villages are so many complications. Like in Delhi, we have these Lal Dora areas, and so the Indian cities to be looked differently than the cities in maybe the developed countries. So this is one point, important point. Second thing, when we talk of resilience, so resilience also being discussed in different forums and different fraternity in different ways. Many times resilience is discussed primarily in terms of social resilience, that how people can evolve and people can have better capacities to withstand the challenges. But I think when we talk about resilience in cities, we cannot separate out people from the technical systems and as well as the infrastructure systems, because a large in cities depends on how do we plan, engineer, and how do we manage our services and supply systems in the cities. For example, what supply system are waste management system, or the transport systems, and so on and so forth in cities. So I think a lot of dependence of the social resilience in cities would depend on how do we look at these systems, and also cities' relationship with the neighboring systems, that is the rural areas, so urban-rural transit, and then certainly disaster resilience. So with a sizable overlap between the two, disaster resilience and climate resilience, there are specific issues related with when we talk about earthquake related issues, that is primarily related with the building safety, whereas climate resilience, it has much broader horizon, because in a lot of issues associated with ecosystems, a lot of issues associated with natural resources also comes in. Then the issues like we past 10 years or so, now we are also peri-urban systems as a contributor to urban resilience, but also one of the worst sufferers of the challenges that arise because of the urban systems. So a kind of a receiving end, but as on date, lacking any clear-cut policy or planning related recognitions for urban areas, though we are trying to work out that something should come out. Then issues related with the newer land uses, like in India, most of the major and medium level cities, now we have seen that over the past years, the urban agriculture has grown very fast as a new land use, primarily growing horticultural and these kind of products. And that is a good support system also to city resilience in certain terms. But it has both ways. How do these systems exploit the groundwater, or do they depend on the kind of a treated wastewater? Are they if there are the cities there are rivers with the cities, then the new land use being recognized then the agriculture is urban forest. I think there's a lot of focus coming on urban forest, and that is, I think, a good development, because the degradation of forest is ongoing despite of the best possible efforts. So there is no other way than start considering forest as a part of the land use in cities also, or the built up area, or the built up development, so that forest should become implicit of the development. And then as I already referred to, that peri-urban systems, how do we look at? Then we should also start looking at the futuristic issues. One is that the globally the UN has declared this 10 years as the UN decade for eco-restoration. And when we have declared for restoration, it means we have recognized that the ecosystems have greatly lost. So how do we regain it? A major issue. And the examples of Chennai flood and major other floodings, and then following drought in Chennai itself is 2016 and 17 after the major flood. It shows that how the urban ecosystems are important, and their loss contributes to seriousness of the climatic related disasters and challenges. Another aspect also should not be missed out. That is like UNCCD, the United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification, of which the COP14 we hosted in India. And all together we decided that we should also start thinking of releasing land back to nature. Although that seems very, very difficult kind of a decision, because everyone wants more and more land, all kind of land users want more land. And at the same time, when we decide that we will start releasing land back to nature, so I think that also indicates that whether it is agriculture, whether it is the housing, we have to think of either going vertical or thinking of some new models of development, so that we utilize lesser land, and also work out that how do we be able to release land back to nature. And the last point, the cities city planners also have to start thinking of future cities. So what cities we have till now, I think down the line, and it will not take much time, Vedyasa would agree that after 4-5 years, we are going to see great transformation. Like electric vehicles are now mostly going to be common. Past 2 years, we saw this great change. And maybe after a few years, we will start seeing the hydrogen vehicles also. So, and beside that, a huge disruptive change that is going to be seen in that everything going to be automated, and more use of robotics, I think. And this alongside this, we are also going to see the great great disruption in social settings. Like all people are living in an apartment, but no one talking to other person. All are connected to each other through either WhatsApp groups. So even when we talk to our neighbors now through WhatsApp groups, even our colonies, our housing societies, we come to know whether today the cleaning of water tank is going to take place today, or something going to happen through WhatsApp groups. So we are connected to each other more through media networks or electronic media rather than in person. So how do we going to see the resilience issues and disaster related issues maybe 5 years down the line, and 10 years down the line, or 20 years down the line? So I think these are some of the issues as a kind of a few additional or lateral yardsticks that I suggest for the discussions, besides looking at the changing climatic conditions and the latest reports of the climatic extreme events and other anthropogenic dimensions. So thank you, and over to you. And certainly I'm very keen to listen to the learned experts of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gupta. And before I invite my first speaker, I think Professor Gupta has laid the ball rolling. But I think that there are few points that I would like to raise. And because yesterday I was in Hisar, and we had a meeting of Citizens Forum called the Urban Citizens Forum in Hisar. And let me remind our participants here that fortunately or unfortunately, there are some specific issues to every town and every city as far as disaster resilience is concerned, but there are some very general issues. And that goes to the basics of planning and how we planned our towns and cities over the last few decades, particularly after the post-90s. And we also, and I think that has to be seen in light of the latest IPCC report. That's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the sixth, and of course the Working Group 3. I mean, that talks about mitigation. Well, our participants must be knowing that every 6 years we have these reports, and I mean we have, and then we have those working groups. Working Group 1 that lays emphasis on on collecting the scientific data and projecting, and then also this Working Group 2 that speaks about the current situation, and of course we have the Working Group 3 that speaks about mitigation. So what I want my speakers to do is to have a contestation, not a single linear line, because unfortunately what we are doing and what we are witnessing now is that as if we know everything, and as if that's the way how cities have to be framed, and cities have to be and with all that sweet quoted words, smart city resilience network. Actually, these resilience networks are not working, Professor Chetan Vidya. You will agree with me than anyone else. So where does the problem lie? And I think where does the problem lie? I want contestations even on that issue, because what we are witnessing is, and of course this report that speaks about and especially the IPCC 6 assessment. I mean, that's the assessment report that we talk about. Lays quite a lot of emphasis on cities, especially on our coastal cities, South Asian cities, and there's a stark warning coming up that, look, hey, if things go as usual, and if this inertia is not broken, then many of our towns and cities, it is projected, would submerge, especially our coastal cities. So there are things that has to be done at the mitigation level, but there are things that has to be done very proactively at the adaptation level. And then we have the Sendai framework. That framework guides us to at least measure, at least create an atlas in the towns and the cities, and then also prioritize some of the aspects. So I think what we need to understand, and especially we have participants who are here, who would like to learn, who would like to cross-exchange many of their views. So what we would like to have some of the experiences that come from the theory that we have, and also the practice that is there in our towns. Take for example, we know anthropogenic reasons are now. I mean, everyone is talking about that, and I think mobility happens to be one of the important areas. But if you look at the mobility sector in most of the towns in North India, even in South India, the mobility still happens to be driven by private automobile cars. Less emphasis on public transport, very less emphasis on bicycle tracks to be that infrastructure to be created, and highly I mean, not even a word on pedestrianization. Though we know 80% of the commute is not more than 7 to 8 kilometers, and a large chunk of our working people, we forget that 80% to 70% to 80%. For example, in Hisar, I can tell you, even for that matter in Delhi, are unorganized workers. So, what are we looking at? I mean, when we talk about city resilience. So I think, so first thing first is that we need to map our towns, we need to map our cities, as far as their vulnerabilities is concerned. That's the first thing. And the vulnerabilities do not just have to be geographic, do not just have to be from the climate angle. It also has to be from the socio-political angle that exists in the towns, because there is a very strong relationship. Then the second aspect, I think, which I would like my speakers to speak about is what kind of convergence is taking place. Now, I do not know whether yesterday there was supposed to be a circular where the three municipal corporations were supposed to be merged. So we have one single municipal corporation. But if you ask a citizen in Delhi, hardly anyone knows who will take care of solid waste management, who will take care of water, sewage, mobility. One part of the mobility is multidimensional, for example, metro, and then you have a separate set of, and this happens in Delhi. Just imagine the state of affairs that we experience in other towns. So I think, how does a city within the city, one department speaks to another department? I mean, for that matter, one parastatal or one utility speaks to another utility, and all of this actually requires a complete revamping or rethinking of the way we are actually looking at the dynamics of urban governance. The third element, I think, which is again very important, is who governs the town, who governs the cities. Unfortunately, this is something which we have been raising and screaming for the last 25 years, since we had the 74th Constitutional Amendment, that let the people plan the cities, the whole question of right to the city. And I, again, let me share my example from Hisar. Not once have the people been consulted, what kind of sewage system, what kind of plots the people should have as far as their housing needs are concerned. So housing will be a very important area for our future in the cities. Housing, not just because the way the houses are being constructed, they are completely anti-resilient, I would say. They are completely, I mean, there's no design. I mean, the design that will consume lesser energy. Even the way there's a design, we find the typology, the glass typologies that are coming up does not sustain even for a second without the use of an air conditioner. These are not sustainable models wherever it is planned. But where it's not planned, things are worse. So I want my speakers to actually dwell on all of these areas, because all of this leads to carbon emissions. All of this leads to further vulnerabilities, increasing the vulnerabilities of our citizens. And yes, within this framework, I think mobility, housing, and urban governance, because the last word that I would like to mention here is that even if you create an atlas, even if you have a city disaster management plan of action, none of the cities in the country have these CDMAs actually ratified. So when there's a disaster, it's the Disaster District Management Authority, the DDMA, that takes the charge. You've seen this during the pandemic. You've seen it in n number of occasions, that the city is a mere adjunct of a civic administration that is run either by the deputy commissioner or by the chief minister. These are not sustainable ways how we should deal with preparedness, with the whole question of adaptability. So yeah, we have 3 days, and what I think we require is extreme form of contestations, so that we can, our participants get more enthused, more energized, not just more information, but also, that whole question of inquisitiveness, why things are not working, why the inertia continues to actually hold us back. Because we have these reports from a scientific basis. The things as usual is not going to lead us for a very secure future. In fact, it's hitting at us right on our head. That look, we've seen extreme temperatures. We have seen flooding, even when it was not experienced in the past. So we are experiencing all of that. And I think with these words, I would, is there somebody who will be conducting the proceedings, Arjun? Or should I ask Professor Chetan Vaidya to straight away go ahead?
Kanika will introduce.
Okay, so yeah, Kanika will introduce. thank you so much. And over to you. Please introduce our guests. And not to mention that we have one of the finest people in the country who have not just the acumen of theory, but also that experience of the praxis. So I think over to you. Then you can introduce our guests. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Now we go to expert trainer session. We are fortunate to have a distinguished expert, Professor Chetan Vaidya, Independent Urban Advisor, former Director, School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, and National Institute of Urban Affairs, New Delhi. We're so glad to have you, sir. You can take over the stage.
Please unmute Chetan, sir.
Yes. Thank you. I'm muted. I'm sorry.
So it went on mute.
Abhi theek hai?
Abhi theek hai. Yes.
Can you hear me now? Can you?
Yes.
I'm audible? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Anil Kumar. It's always a pleasure to listen to you for all those 5 or 6 points you mentioned. I may not be able to cover all of them in this lecture, but that is a back of my mind, and particularly linking disaster with climate change. And similarly, thank you, Tikenderji, for 4 or 5 points you mentioned. And governance continues to be my concern when it comes to urban sector, and how do we empower our local bodies, an issue which needs to be resolved very soon. And I also would like to thank Arjun and particularly NIDM and IMPRI team, which has been working behind the scene on this presentation and on this training program. So we could go to the next slide. I'm speaking of managing climate change in urban areas, in urban India, and it's part of this 3-day training program. I will speak, I thought I should speak on something very basic, simple things like understanding climate change. There's a lot of confusing terms, and there are a lot of terms which are simple but made very complicated, I think, both sides. We'll also talk about urban India trends and governance. And we'll then talk about the linkages between urban climate change in urban sector, particularly the initiative, one which was mentioned from NIUA by Anil Kumarji. Then talk about city climate action plans. It's not that nothing is happening in this sector. Things are happening. They're happening very slowly. They're happening and not as fast.
Planning since that day, because that day it was.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead. Some glitches. Yeah.
And then I will talk about green financing. What is this green financing? And way forward, where I'll take up some issues. May not be resolve all the issues in this next one. We start with very simple. Climate change refers to increases changing in the measures of climate over a long period of time. It could be temperature, it could be wind, it could be rains. But basically, we are talking of changes in the long-term situation. And within that, there is something called global warming, which discusses global temperature mainly due to increasing concentration of greenhouse gases. So this both global warming is part of the climate change, and that is a term which is often used in our discussion. There was an agreement which is called as Paris Agreement, an international treaty signed by 196 parties in 2015. And the aim was to limit global warming, preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. So this is an understanding of more than 180 countries and large number of parties, which was signed in 2015. And by 2020, countries submitted their action plans, which is also known as nationally determined contribution. So these are the kind of things I thought I should mention before I get into the details. Next one. When it comes to climate strategies, there are 2 terms being used. One is mitigation, which means making impacts of climate change less severe by preventing or reducing emission of greenhouse gases into atmosphere. So you reduce emission of greenhouse gases. It could include retrofitting of buildings to make them more energy efficient, adaptable renewable energy sources like solar, wind, small hydro, electrical vehicles by use of biofuels. These are short to medium term efforts and are expensive. Parallelly, there is some term called adaptation, which involves taking appropriate measures to prevent the effects of climate change. It is basically changing life for climate change. It involves long-term strategies. If you ask me, adaptation in the long run is more important than mitigation. But on the other hand, it will be like development of drought-resistant crops. But on the other hand, there are also authors, and I am one of them, who believe that adaptation and mitigations are two sides of the same coin. So when you develop a city action plan, I think that distinction of adaptation and mitigation is not important. Important is we look at these measures together and resolve the climate or manage climate impacts. Yes. Now, India's urban population, as all of us know, is in 2011 was 377 million. About 32% of the population was urban, and there are more than 4,000 urban local bodies, and 46 of them were metro towns with population more than 10 lakhs. So urban India is very large and is very diversified. I think both these terms are extremely important. We are very large and we are very diversified. So one size fit all will not work for India. So somebody sitting in the Niman Bhavan cannot decide what should happen in cities of Gujarat or Maharashtra. For that example, even within a state, if you take Baroda, Gujarat and Rajkot, which are only 4 hours different, are completely different. Baroda is basically people who work in offices and PSUs and organizations like that, whereas Rajkot people work with their hands. And that is the kind of, so any strategy which you use for Baroda may not work for Rajkot and so on. So one size fit all will not work for India, but we have to improve our urban infrastructure as well as our governance to achieve economic activity. Both have to be improved. If you only improve infrastructure but do not improve governance, it will not help. And if you improve our governance but don't improve our infrastructure, that will not help. And all that means urban sector has to be sustainable and inclusive. Next one. Now, Mr. Panwa mentioned urban governance. So we had in 1992, 74th Constitutional Amendment, which gave a constitutional status to the municipalities of urban local bodies. With that, we have regular elections. We have representation for women and weaker sections. The state governments has to constitute state finance commission to provide regular support to urban local bodies. There's also now district planning committees and metropolitan committees. And there is a provision for 12th schedule in the constitution now. Unfortunately, functions, finances, and functionaries have not been transferred by the all state government. So though we have these 3 levels of urban governance, national, state, and urban local bodies, a lot of things stop at the state level. They don't get transferred to the local body. And that is one issue which needs to be tackled over time. There is Kerala, which has given a lot of empowered urban local bodies, and those municipal corporations not run by the state appointed municipal commissioners, but by mayors who have executive powers. But these are very few examples like this. We need to do a lot in this activity. Next one. Now, it's not that nothing is happening in climate change in urban sector. I think first is that there is a national mission on sustainable habitat under the Ministry of Urban Housing and Urban Initiative, the Urban Affairs. There are also strategies which pertain to urban governance, capacity building, data, technology, innovations, and financing are part of the mechanism for this NMSH, as it is called. There's also, Ministry has also set up what is called as Climate Alliance, where more than 70 organizations have come together with diverse skills, strengths, resources to help urban local bodies or help urban sector with climate action. National Institute of Urban Affairs has now what is called as Climate Center for Cities, CQ, established by the ministry, which coordinates various activities related with climate change and action at the urban level. And then there is Climate Smart Cities Assessment Framework, which I think could be treated as a starting point for actually working on climate change issues at the city level. We'll talk more about this in the next slide. Now, Climate Smart Cities Assessment Framework is a tool to assess current climate situation and provide a roadmap for cities to adapt and implement combating climate change, both mitigation and attention. So this becomes a tool to measure where you are and then how you can proceed further. It has 28 diverse indicators across 5 categories, which is energy and green management of buildings, urban planning, green cover, biodiversity, mobility and air quality, water resource management, waste management. These are the 5 broad categories, and then there are 28 diverse indicators. It provides indicators for measuring SDG 11 and SDG 13 also. The first round of assessment was done in 2020. 96 cities were covered by it. The second round was completed in 2021. 126 cities were covered by this round. And 8 cities, the maximum you could get is 5 stars, but 8 cities got 4 stars. That is Surat, Ahmedabad, Pune, Vijayawada, Rajkot, Vizag, Pimpri, Chinchwad, and Vadodara. But none of them got 5 stars. So that is where we are when it comes to assessment in terms of climate smart cities. And what is interesting is this assessment doesn't only gives you a 5-star or 4-star or 3-star. It goes a step further. Next slide, please. This is a city which got 4 stars. But it got only level 1, that is 0 for city climate action plan assessment. So within those 26 indicators, one of the indicator, this city got nil, and then the NIUA and its team working on from CQ recommended the city should establish a city level stakeholders committee with key members from different agencies, including NGOs, document the institutionalization of the committee and climate coordination cell, coordinate and develop and implement a work plan on annual reporting basis of its and tracking performance, regular monitoring and auditing of the climate cell, a GHS, that is greenhouse gas emission inventory for all sectors, conduct climate change vulnerability assessment, and also develop a climate action plan with participatory manner. So what is very interesting about this ranking is it does the ranking for 28 indicators, and then it goes a step further and tells the city what it can do to improve its ranking. So hopefully, if the city really does all that is being told for this year onward, then the city would get up to 4 or 5 points in the next assessment in 2023. Next one. Now, each city can prepare its climate action plan. Having done their climate assessment through the Climate Smart City Assessment Program, next step could be preparing the city climate action plan. And the methodology, as per one of there are 3 or 4 methodologies in the country being utilized, but I have taken one of which is called CAP Cities Project 2022. I have taken that methodology to explain you what those, but more or less broadly, they cover steps for other methodologies also. First is make the city commit to preparing a climate change, and then set up institutional structure. That is basically a coordination committee and a technical committee to prepare this climate change action plan. Assess local context and baseline climate performance assessment. That is basically do a greenhouse gas emission analysis and assessment, and also carry out vulnerability analysis. It's not only limited to physical, as mentioned by one of our coordinators, Mr. Tikender Singh, that it should also include social vulnerability analysis. Then develop a climate action plan and get it approved, which would mean identify climate actions, allocate budget, and approve climate action targets. So you do not only give the assessment and where the problem is, but also in different sectors, but also say what solutions could be and how this could be paid for. Then implement the action plan, monitor the implementation in link with our targets. Review and scale up. Maybe every year this should be reviewed, scaled up and looked up. So these are the 7 steps which will involve city climate action plan methodology. Next one. Now, what are the various solutions which cities are taking up? I've just mentioned there could be 36 possible solutions at a city level. Of course, it will change from cities to cities. But broadly, what cities are doing is introduction of energy saving LED street lights. It's a very common now established thing, solution. Promoting public transport, it was mentioned earlier. Promoting walking and non-motorized transport, I think that is extremely important. Developing urban forests, including Miyawaki forest. Promoting use of solar energy. Also, not only at the municipal level, municipal buildings, schools, but even at the household level. I know about Udaipur, which gives subsidy in addition to national and state government. The municipal local government gives subsidy for putting up the solar panels. Encourage electric autos and automobile. Decentralized collection and treatment of solid waste, and that the treatment of solid waste could lead to other initiatives. Nature-based treatment of sewage system, and something which we keep moving out, but some cities are being tying out, is procurement guidelines. The normal procurement guidelines will not help to us to achieve some of our objectives in climate change. Next one. Now, there are cities which have implemented climate change in their cities, which includes Surat, Udaipur, and Coimbatore, Rajkot. These are the cities which have prepared their climate action plan. And recently, Mumbai has also prepared its climate action plan. And they work on various steps. Obviously, a city like Bombay will have to work on coastal issues dealing with it. So there is a progress. And I'm told that Maharashtra government has asked 42 of its major cities to develop their climate action plan. So these are the things. Also, Tamil Nadu which has set up a green company, which has also taken actions to prepare urban climate plans. Chennai is one which is preparing for itself. Coimbatore is also preparing its climate action plan, and they will work on how it can be followed up. The next issue is green financing. Unfortunately, I must say this, unfortunately, though a number of actions have been taken up in the area of carrying out the assessment of GHG, vulnerability analysis, preparing climate action plan, we still have not seen extra or additional funding for climate action. One area one city which has issued green bonds is Ghaziabad, which has raised 150 crores in 2021 at the interest rate of 8.1 per year. It is going to use it for sustainable water management. It's a 10-year maturity period, and green bonds in India are governed by SEBI regulations of 2017, and they have to be used only for renewable and sustainable energy, clean transportation, sustainable water and waste management, and climate change adaptation. But we still have to see a number of things. Some cities are trying to involve private sector and develop bankable projects where the funding of that project over a period of time can pay for the private sector's role. But these are still not many examples in practice which are happening on the ground. Next one. Now, what is the way forward? What is the way forward? Is something which we really, I think the first step is to demystify the terms which we use in climate change in the urban context. When Maharashtra government started developing their climate change activities for cities other than Bombay, few cities mentioned to their partners that we are already doing this. So there are things which cities are already doing. They have to either do it little more or put in more money or more effort, but it's not something which is completely new. So what we need to do as technical people is to demystify the terms and we use in climate change for urban context. I think that should be the starting point. I mean, recently I heard science-based targets. Now, all targets have to be science-based. I mean, why do you confuse my municipal commissioner or my municipal official by using such terms? I still don't know. Second thing, whatever action plans are being made, they are not legally binding. They are being made independent of master plan. And this is something, the linkage between climate action plan, city climate action plan and master plan has to be worked out. And we have to, for this, we will require to incorporate climate concerns into urban and regional development plan formulation guidelines prepared by TCPO in 2014, and also model building bylaws prepared by TCPO in 2016. So climate issues have to get embedded into or integrated with these two things. And also part 11 of National Building Code, which deals with sustainability, this may be suitably integrated with municipal building rules in the states. I think these are three of the steps, long-term step, but they needs to be done if we really want to integrate climate action plan with master plans. We also want to empower urban local bodies to build their capacity through training and technical assistance. I showed you the list which NIU has sent to one of the cities to take it from 0 point in climate action plan to 80 points or 100 points. But if you really want to do that, you need to have capacity, you need to have people, which in short term could be from technical assistance, from consultant or other partners. And also you need to train the municipal staff. I think one of our biggest limitations in case of urban local bodies that they do not have enough capacity, in addition to need for empowering legal. Then also provide additional funding for climate related projects, which is required. At the moment, there are no specific funds for climate related projects at the city level. They have to depend on one of the missions. It could be housing for all, or it could be Amrut, or it could be smart city mission, but they are not separate projects for additional funding for climate related projects. And one more thing is, which was mentioned earlier, is how do we link climate change with disaster management? I think disaster management also has funds. They also have to prepare city level plans or district level plans. They also have funds for capacity building. But how do we get link climate action plans or climate issues with the disaster management plans is something which we really need to work on the ground level. It also makes things more complicated in terms of governance, because one of them is being dealt by the Home Ministry, the other is dealt by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and third group is dealt with third ministry involved in this is our Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. So how do we get these three different ministries and maybe three different departments at the state level to work together with one agency called Municipal Corporation? This is something which is going to be very complex and labor intensive, but we'll need to coordinate to get the best out of all these three. All the three things have to work. And finally, my last point would be, how do we communicate with all stakeholders? I think even something which is happening in my own city with my exposure to all this, I don't understand what is happening in climate change issues. So how do I communicate? I don't know what Baroda is doing. I went to Surat and Baroda got an award. Then I realized they're preparing something. So this is something which you don't even come as professional, we don't know. And it's no way a common man can understand. So how do we communicate in regional language? How do we take this discussion in regional newspapers? Nukkad pe kya baat ho rahi hai? Puchna padta. I think I'm going to stop with that, and I'm very happy to respond to comments, suggestions, and we also have two very prominent coordinators here. So thank you so much, all of you, for this opportunity. I am available for questions.
Tikender sir.
Professor Vaidya,
Yes, I am available.
please go ahead. Have you finished?
I have finished. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So Kanika, before you invite our next speaker, I think that we can take the questions once all the speakers have spoken. Is that fine with you, Professor Vaidya? Can you hold on?
Yes, I am available.
Okay, great. So, Kanika, I think you can go ahead, but just an anecdote that I want to share with you, because
Yes, please.
when you were, I mean, it just struck my mind, and before I forget, once the
Yeah, please
questions
go ahead.
come up. I think this is very interesting when you spoke about the city climate action plan, how it must be integrated with the master plans. Unfortunately, this is what is not happening.
True.
And this is exactly what happened in Simla. The master plan was prepared by some Ahmedabad-based company, and of course, huge money was doled out. And now the NGT has struck it down because they no. And actually, it's a copy-paste model of the planes, not realizing that one size doesn't fit all, as you rightly pointed out. And no concern for the climate action plan, which was already prepared by the city. Okay, so and now that money has gone to waste. Now, unfortunately, the tragic part is now the NGT has become a planner. Now the NGT will decide what form of a master plan will be made. So actually, these are the intricate complexities that we are working with. Yeah, but what you rightly pointed out, we require that integrity.
Thank you for this.
Thank you, Professor Vaidya. I think we'll have questions later on. Kanika, can you go ahead and invite our next speaker, please?
Yes, sir. So just a few announcements. Participants, do mention to you, I mean, just use the question is Q&As on the chat box, and please raise your hand. After 20 minutes of expert lectures, next 20 minutes will be for Q&As, and please post your Q&As on the chat box.
There is one question also, Karnika, by Tarun Pant ji. Just read it out. It is for Chetan sir.
Yes.
No, I think later on, once we have all the three speakers, will that be fine, or one by one?
One by one.
Let's do one by one. I'm sorry.
Let's do one by one. Okay, fine.
Let's
fine.
do one.
Yeah, that's why I asked earlier.
I got confused.
Better. Yeah.
Please,
Please.
yeah.
Karnika, can you read the Q&A? Let me read it. Okay, so we need high quality coordination among all of the stakeholders in order to achieve sustainable urban development, and the major cities in India are falling short in this regard. Is there a structure for the stakeholders to engage in high quality coordination, and if so, what is it?
There are two levels of coordination which is required at a metropolitan or a city level. One is coordination among different departments. I think that is something which doesn't happen, and we have one example. Possible solution could be Unified Transport Authority at the metropolitan level, which could sort of resolve this issue. But how do you coordinate? That is one thing. And second, would be how do we coordinate with the stakeholders, the various stakeholders, even non-government organizations, civil society, huge amount of knowledge with the retired officials who are available, private sector. How do we coordinate these with the public sector? I mean, these are the two levels of this, and basically this connection is not easy, but it is required, and various people have tried different steps at different stages. Some have been successful, and most have not been successful. But this is something which needs to be done, and the idea is not to delay the project. The idea is not to postpone decision, but to take a decision which is right for most of the citizens. And that is something. For whom are we planning? That is the question we need to respond to this. I'll stop that. I hope I responded to the question.
Okay. Anek Dharaji has raised the hand. Would you like to speak? Please unmute and speak. Anek Dharaji, you have raised your hand. Okay. So meanwhile, two more questions have come. I'll club them together.
Yeah, please.
So Vashika is asking that, hello, sir, thanks for the insightful session. Would like to know, should the city level climate action plans should further dwell into ward level action plans for better implementation? One more question I'll just club it. This is from Isha Bhatnagarji. Good morning, sir. Thank you for your insightful lecture. You mentioned a method to climate resilient by using EVs. Is relying on EV really sustainable right now? Since our country is yet to shift to renewable sources for energy generation, we are still highly dependent on coal. Also, if majority of our population relies on EV, the power consumption charges are going to rise up. Your comments.
You have yourself answered the question. I think with the way we are promoting EV, I think it is too early. We need to have a balance between renewable sources of energy and then think of EV. But I think this seems to be very easy to start the electric vehicles. And we are saying that after trying to see, we saw the vehicle themselves are not ready for the heat of the cities. Then we have seen some vehicles have got had fire problems. So I think we should go slow on it, but that is a path on a medium-term basis. But in short term, I think we need a lot of pilot testing and a lot of concerns about various issues. Even within the buildings, the way some of the builders are providing EV facilities, it could lead to fire. So we should be extremely careful in going ahead with this. So I also feel that we should go a little bit slow and experiment and test before we go full-fledged on EV policy. As far as this first question, Arjun, could you tell me what she was asking for, Arjun?
Right, I'll repeat.
Yeah.
Would like to know, should the city level climate action plans should further delve into ward level action plans for better implementation?
I think it is important to transfer city level action plan, if at not ward level, at least at the zone level, or what at least at the zonal level, if not at ward, for implementation for those. So some of the things which are at the city level, maybe they will those projects will continue at city level. So if you're setting up a solar plant somewhere else, that's obviously it is a city level issue. But then some of the things will have to go down to at least wards or zonal, if not ward. Yes.
But I think, Professor Vaidya, this also requires, when we prepare a city action plan, because this is what we did in Simla.
Yeah.
In fact, first the ward action plans must be prepared, and then the city action plan, because then the city really has lots of inputs, lots of data coming up from the ward, not just, mixing both the quantitative and qualitative assessment.
Yeah, that would be bottom-up approach.
Yes, yeah. And actually, that's what, when we created the Shimla Atlas, that's exactly how we did it.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So, sir, few more questions have poured in. So I'll just read them one by one. Riya Bhattacharya ji is saying that, good morning, sir. While ULBs are concerned to mitigate the issue in a metropolitan area like Kolkata, where there is more than one municipality governing the area, so which body should be responsible for urban planning for the whole area? Or is there a requirement for parastatal bodies for integrated planning? Or so the thing which you, sir, raised, that urban areas are complex. Should I keep on reading two more?
No, let me respond to that. I have not recently kept in touch with what is happening in Calcutta metropolitan planning thing, but I am very closely connected with National Capital Region, where what is being proposed is the NCR prepares a overall regional plan, a very broad strategic plan, and then the urban local bodies in 4 different states. As you know, it covers 4 different states. The urban local bodies in each of the states prepares its own master plan, but both have to be, the master plans prepared by urban local bodies have to be in consonance with the National Capital Region plan. So that is one solution which is being tried out in Delhi, NCR, and I think that could be a possible solution for this complex problem.
Right. So Mithun Ranjan Deji is asking that what strategy should be taken in respect of school security for disaster management in northeastern state, as we are in very risky zone. So what for the institutional aspects for hilly regions?
I'm sorry, I will not be able to respond. Anil Kumarji is right. Maybe later on you can ask Anil Kumarji to respond to this.
Right.
Unless he's available now.
Okay. So Ujjwal Gurudaswani is asking that the introduction of 12th schedule in the constitution introduces 18 functions to devolve to municipal corporation. Unfortunately, to this day, not more than 9 out of 18 functions are devolved to city corporation. Even the Supreme Court in one judgment has considered these functions as just as enabling function and upheld the role of state government having more authority. How do you see the empowerment of municipal corporation in the preparation of climate change action plans for the cities and providing local solutions to deal with the climate crisis? So the role of
I was remotely involved with the urban sector when the 74th and 75th, 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments were carried out, and the then secretary, we used to interact with at the ministry's level. But somehow I am a person who feels that whatever may happen, the long run solution to urban problem is empowering urban local bodies. But the problem is, as the time is passing, I mean, more people had agreed with this kind of statement or approach 20 years ago, or even 15 years ago. But as the time is passing, less people have confidence or trust in our urban local bodies. I think there is a general feeling that urban local bodies do not have the capacity to deal with urban issues. So rather than empowering them, giving them capacities, giving them functions, finances, and the functionaries, the approach is just the other way. And one typical example I would like to mention here again, where I keep on every time I get an opportunity, there it was not necessary to set up those special purpose vehicle for smart city projects, smart city missions. We should have promoted our urban local bodies. In the long run, that would have been much better. But unfortunately, that has not happened. And the same is the case with climate change. I sincerely believe we should strengthen our urban local bodies. It will take time. They will crawl, they will fall. But in the long run, that would be more happen. So what is true for general urban development is also true for climate issues in urban sector.
Okay, so sir, this is one last question. Again,
Arjun, I would also like to respond to this question maybe later when I just pass my closing remarks.
I was meaning to ask this question.
Yeah.
You have more strong views on
this. Later, maybe later.
Please, just for continuing,
let's proceed with the finish.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So Himanshu ji is asking, sir, we have seen that EVs through climate friendly, though climate friendly, but when discharged on highways, they are being recharged using charging points running on generators consuming fuel. Are EV really an alternative for fuel vehicle, or it's just another business idea? So, sir, really a lot of things coming that the coal is powering it, but then you are passing the battery. How do you see that?
Even in case of solar, I don't know what will happen after 10 years when we have to get rid of them and how we are going to. Electric swapping, battery swapping is one example which is given as a suggestion for, and I think the Niti Aayog has just come out or is going to come out with draft policy on battery swapping. So that could be an answer, but I still think it's too early for us to go whole hog in going for electric vehicles. We should just sit down and think about it.
Right, Tikendra sir.
Well, I think this is by Ujjwal Gurdaswani, the same one, no?
Yes.
Okay, just let me read it because I just, okay, 12 schedule. Yeah, I think this is 100% true. Not even 9. I mean, I think IMPRI, or was it PRIA? There was this study done by one of the organizations, and we found that only 3 functions have been universally transferred to the city governments across India. Now, why this has happened, there are many reasons. One of the reasons is what Charles Correa, in one of his very famous articulation, and that LSC workshop, I was also a participant there. You remember, Professor Chitranvedya, that Urban Age Conference organized jointly by Deutsche Bank and the London School of Economics, where Charles Correa said, the chief ministers want to control the cities because they treat them as adjuncts. So I think what we require is, even the 74th constitutional amendment requires more space now, because migration and all were not issues, and migration such an important issue as when we talk about climate resilience in our cities. So I think there have to be multi-pronged ways in which we approach this issue. But at the same time, like we are doing from our own end, I mean, we are mobilizing few mayors, and again filing a petition in the Supreme Court just to get the 74th constitutional amendment implemented in the country, because this is a constitutional mandate. I mean, this is not something that we are demanding out of the box. I mean, this is the mandate that the national government, the provincial, the state governments, and the city governments have to perform. So one of the ways could be this. But I think more emphasis, more efforts, and also facilitation of the city governments to enable them to actually to really pose as a potential for reclaiming their rights. I think that needs to be done. So maybe it will take some more time. But yeah, from our end, we are just bringing all those stakeholders together. And very soon we'll be filing a petition in the Supreme Court that at least implement the provisions of the 74th Constitutional Amendment. Yeah.
Right. So shall we move to our next expert, Karnika?
Thank you. Thank you. I will be with you, but may not be continuously. But okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
For taking out your time. For taking out your time and providing us this enlightening session and conversations. The next expert trainer who have joined us is Shri Taj Hassan, Senior Program Coordinator, ICLEI South Asia. We welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you, Kanika. Would somebody be sharing the screen? Yes, okay, thank you.
Yes, it's on.
Okay, I'll just briefly put on my video. I'm not sure about my bandwidth. It might just go off anytime.
It's working fine.
But okay, yeah, great. So I will be talking about planning for climate resilience in cities. And I was listening to Professor Vaidya's presentation. Many of the things that he was talking about are very resonant with us as well. We work with the cities, and we've been actually, the cities that he was mentioning about, Rajkot, Coimbatore, those are the cities that we have, ICLEI has worked with to prepare the climate action plans. So yeah, so a lot of the learnings that he was talking about are some things that we also keep facing every time. My name is Shri Taj Hassan. I am from ICLEI. ICLEI is an association of local governments. I'll just briefly introduce ICLEI first and then go on to what I want to talk about, which is basically the tools that cities can use to plan for climate resilience. And so, yeah, if you can move on to the next slide, please. So, like I said, ICLEI is an association of local governments. We have around 2,500 local and regional governments who are our members. We are active in around 125 plus countries. And what we do is basically try to reach out to cities and help them to plan for and implement sustainable development, urban sustainability, basically. And if you can move on to the next slide. we have around 27 offices all over the world. Our office is the South Asia Secretariat, which is based in Delhi, and we work all over South Asia, including India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, all these places. Moving on, please. The way we work is basically through these 5 pathways. We work on low emission development, we work on nature-based development, equitable and people-centered development, resilient development, and circular development. So all of this, we hope that if we go into an integrated solution, we can bring about a systemic change if we look at all these pathways. And today I will be talking about some of the tools that we have developed and we have used in cities, which deal with urban resilience and urban climate resilience particularly. So moving on. Yeah, next please. The first tool that I would like to talk about is the ICLEI ASEAN process. Moving on, please. This ICLEI ASEAN process is a tool which was developed by 2 offices of ICLEI, ICLEI South Asia and Oceania, and supported by Rockefeller Foundation under their ASEAN program, Asian Cities Climate Change Resilience Network program. And this was a guide which was developed after a study of several tools which were being used at that time for vulnerability assessment, climate vulnerability assessment in cities, and drawing upon ASEAN's past experiences, and where there were some 10 cities where ASEAN had already developed their vulnerability assessment work. And from those experiences, we have tried to develop a simplified, a streamlined, a replicable process which can be used by the cities without a lot of external assistance. So what we try to do is make the cities self-reliant and not rely too much on external support. So like Professor Vaidya was saying, that building the capacity within the city is more important than actually trying to set up some parallel system which can support the city. This was the idea of having this tool. Next, please. The main benefits that we saw from this was that the awareness generation. So a lot of the tool is basically introducing the city governments to what is climate change, how do you take care of it, what are the different actions that you can take, what is mitigation, what is adaptation. All these things are actually shared with the city officials and introduces them to the nuances of climate change and how it is impacting their different systems, the work that they are doing daily, the systems that they handle, their solid waste management, their water supply, their sewerage systems, how will it be affected by climate change, how can it be made better. So all these impacts, how do you manage these impacts in a better way? It also helps to promote knowledge exchange with other cities, with other technical partners, with other local partners. So the entire process actually is based on setting up a stakeholder group and then using that local stakeholder group to run that entire system. So if you use your local people who are the local stakeholders that you have within your city, they have a better knowledge, a better understanding of what is affecting the city, why is it being affected. So the nuances of the social impacts, the nuances of the demographic impacts. So all these things can get captured when you're trying to make a climate plan as well. It helps to produce, of course, the resilience strategy accordingly and integrate this resilience strategy into your own development plan. Yes, next, please. This is the structure that we had come up with. It looks complicated, but it is not actually complicated because it's a very logical flow of information. So it starts with the engagement process where you actually set up your institutional mechanisms, you set up your core team, who is going to work on the issue, who is going to do the who is going to write up, who is going to make the connections between the different stakeholders, who are the stakeholders that you want to involve? How do you set up your stakeholder platform? So that entire thing, you do it in the engagement process. Then you go into your systems analysis. So you analyze what is happening in the climate sector in your city. How are your systems, your urban systems, whichever system that you want to deal with, how do you prioritize them? How do you select them? And then see what is the climate impact in those systems. You identify the risks, the climate risks that are posed to these systems, and you prioritize those risks as well. Then you move on to the vulnerability assessment, where you identify who is vulnerable to what and why. So your people, your areas, and all these things are identified. So how, who and where are the main pain points. That is what you identify in your vulnerability assessment. You identify your areas, you identify your social groups, and you do an adaptive capacity analysis. So how far can they actually adapt to climate change? That is what you analyze over here. And all this then feeds into your resilience strategy. So basically, you know what are your climate risks, you know which are the areas that are impacted, which are the populations that are impacted, and you identify what can you do to mitigate those impacts. So that is what this entire process is about. This follows into your implementation. Of course, you have to identify your funding options. You have to see how do you want to plan for this, and how do you want to implement it, who will monitor, who will implement. So all these things you have to outline, of course, and implement it. And once you do your implementation, we assume that it will support resilience and it will improve the resilience. So you do a monitoring and review also of the entire process, that where are you standing now? And this then feeds into your next round, because this is a continuous process. Your city, like the city is evolving, your resilience plans, your resilience actions, all of that also has to change accordingly. So therefore, this once you do your monitoring, it has to feed into your next cycle of assessment. So in the next cycle, of course, you need not have the engagement process again, but you might want to change some of the stakeholders that you want to engage. So in that case, you're free to do that. So it then feeds into that cycle again. So this is how this continuous process happens. Next, please. So this process is basically beneficial because it's a very flexible process. Somebody was asking about the ward level implementation in the last session. And this process that we have, it can be applied at the city level, it can be applied at a ward level, and it can be applied at a district or a regional level. It can be basically modified to suit the requirement of that area. There is no particular reliance on scientific modeling. So a lot of the work on climate change gets stuck within cities, particularly because the city officials, they are engineers, they are not really trained to look at climate change, and they're not really trained to look at environmental sustainability. And they do not understand all the the scientific jargon that is used in IPCC manuals and so on. So a lot of this gets stalled because of the lack of scientific information, or because they think that if we don't have the scientific backing, then we cannot take action. But that's not true. This process does not rely a lot on scientific assessments. It does, however, obviously you need to do some kind of study so that you understand what are the climate impacts that your city will be facing. But that can be done through your secondary reports. A lot of the reports are available now, even at state level and district level. Just 1 second, please. Sorry about that. Yes. And then the next thing is that it can be as detailed as you want it to be. There could be reiterations. Like I said, it is a cyclical process. You can go on conducting this process, and it provides a platform for civil society to engage with the local governments. Somebody was asking about this as well, and this process is actually a very useful process, because when we are conducting the process, we use something called the shared learning dialogue, where we assume that all stakeholders bring something to the table, and if we share the information that we have with others, in the long run, it will help to increase our ability to adapt better. So that's the main idea of having a shared learning or a shared experience in this process. Yeah, next, please. This is the next tool. So when we started working on the IAP, the liaison process that I was talking about, we realized that it had certain limitations, and this tool is something which tries to overcome those limitations. And this is a tool which is looking at both adaptation and mitigation. The previous one was more focused on adaptation, and therefore it did not really go into the greenhouse gas emissions, inventorization, and so on. So this tool, however, the Climate Resilient Cities Action Plan methodology, which we have developed with SDC, Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, this is a tool which tries to help bring together both climate mitigation and adaptation. Next, please. So climate resilience is defined as the capacity of a socio-ecological system to absorb stresses and maintain function. I don't want to go reading into this. I'm sure we can share this presentation with the participants. What I want to explain is that, when we are talking about resilience, I always give this example of a rubber band. So when we used to talk about resilience, we thought that, if you stretch a rubber band and you leave it, it should come back. So the shock, it should absorb the shock and then come back to its original state. Now we say that, no, it should actually be better than what it was, the build back better concept. And that is what climate resilience is all about. So it should be able to absorb the shocks, and it should be able to withstand any kind of stresses and move on. It should be able to be better than what it was initially. According to ICLEI, next please. So this is what we think is climate resilience. So a combination of adaptation and and mitigation. Adaptation being, considering that climate change is already happening, what do you do to adapt to that change that is already happening? And mitigation is basically a reduction in the greenhouse gases so that you avoid further emissions and try to reduce climate change as much as possible. So the resilience part is in this system, at least, considered as a combination of adaptation and mitigation. Next, please. We had two tools. So the ICLEI ACID process, like I explained, was already there. It was the vulnerability assessment tool that ICLEI had. And the Green Climate Cities was actually another tool that ICLEI in European countries was using much more extensively. They were doing this to have this low carbon development pathway, an urban low carbon development pathway. And this builds on almost 20 years of experience that we had working on climate change, and has developed this tool. And in this, the Climate Resilient Cities Action Plan, the CRCAP tool that we call it. So in this tool, we've tried to combine both of these together. Next, please. And this is what has come out of it. It looks complicated, but again, it's a very logical flow, so it's not really very complex. This is a 3x3x3 process. So the first three phases is analyze, act, and accelerate. And under each of these phases, under each analyze, act, and accelerate, there are some sub-steps, and each of these sub-steps have tools. So when we come to analyze, the analyze process, the phase, It has 3 steps of commit and mobilize, research and assess, analyze and set baseline. So under each of these steps, there are again 3 more steps. And all these steps are defined through certain tools. So when you follow those tools, you can conduct this step. So that's how it's a very a logical and a very simple way of doing assessments. And this can be done by the cities themselves. It does not require specific scientific training that experts can give. But yes, you would obviously want to consult with several experts if you want to do a holistic and a more integrated plan that you want to prepare for your city. Next, please. So the first step of analyze is where we talk about setting up your baselines and setting up your institutional mechanisms. Like in the ASN process, like I mentioned, you set up your core team, you set up any kind of commitment that you make. If the city mayor or the city commissioner makes a commitment, gives a press release and says that, okay, the city is trying to prepare this climate action plan. And that's the first step of it. And out of this analysis, then we do a baseline analysis. A baseline analysis involves a lot of data collection. But this data is mostly available with the cities. And if it is not available with the cities, it would be available with some government departments which the city can access. So according to, after that, we will come to the system analysis. So the main outputs of the analyze step is the system analysis, where we identify the systems which are fragile to climate change. And for each of these systems, we can identify fragility statements, we can identify their climate risks, and then prioritize those risks as well, so that we can then take action. The second thing that we come up with is, sorry, please go back. So the second thing that we come up with is, can we go back to the previous one? Yes, this one. So the second output that we have is the vulnerability map. So once we have our systems analysis, we can identify which are the areas within the city which are impacted most by these systems. So that can give us the vulnerability map. The third thing that we get is the Ghg Emission Inventory. This was mentioned in the last presentation also. This is the greenhouse gas emission inventory of the entire city. So which process within the city is releasing what kind of greenhouse gases. So that is what is analyzed in this. This is again based on data collected from the city. And this has been, there is a software for this, which the city can then put in the data, and the software will create this this graph or this result that we have, the greenhouse gas emission inventory, so to say. So this software, again, the cities can register and they can use, and this is not, it's, I think it's free of cost. So it should be, cities should be able to access it as well if they want to. Yeah, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, the second one of ACT. The ACT phase is where we actually identify the interventions and implement them. So there are basically 2 outputs of here, where we have already identified our systems which are at risk. And so for each of those systems, we have to identify how do we reduce the emissions, because we know what emissions are coming from which sector. Sorry. And we can also identify how do we adapt to changing climate for these systems. So once we have these interventions identified, we can then start demonstrating pilots and scaling up. So the demonstration of pilots is, it's only like a teaser. We cannot actually achieve a reduction in emissions or any significant development if we do not scale up. So therefore, scaling up is extremely essential. And that brings me to my last phase of accelerate. Can we go on, please, to the next slide? So in Accelerate, what we want to do is basically try to get cities to mobilize cities to take action in a scaled up manner, in a large scale, and not just scaling up, but also scaling out. So the cities don't just try to implement it within their city, but they also encourage other cities to start taking climate action, because of course we are all in this together, and we cannot really achieve any significant development without all of us working together towards the same goal. So that is the idea of accelerating. Next, please. The main highlights of this tool is basically that it is the first ever combined tool that we have developed for climate adaptation and mitigation. And this is kind of one of a kind. Most of the tools that were available before this was only for either adaptation or only for mitigation. So this was quite a good achievement for the tool to have. It is user-friendly for local governments. It has a simple set of tools, and if you fill up those tools, you can actually come up with your end result will be a climate action plan, which you can then use to implement your actions. It is tried, tested, and refined. Like I was mentioning, Rajkot, Udaipur, Coimbatore, and Siliguri were the first cities that we tested it in India. These were the cities that Professor Vaidya was also mentioning about the climate action plan. So this is the project under which they did it actually. And this tool has now been recommended to be used in 25 cities. We are also using it in other projects. So it's not just only under this Urban Leds project that we're doing, but also in other projects, we are regularly using this tool. Like I should actually mention that the tool itself, even though it has this 3x3 process, sometimes because of the requirements of the cities, if they want to do a fast track version of this tool, that is also possible, and we can actually select what exactly the city is requiring, and we can implement accordingly and implement the tool accordingly. So that is up to the cities as to what they would want to take care of. And yeah, this is now being promoted in Bhutan and Sri Lanka as well under the support of SDC from Asia-Leds Partnership. Yeah. So the last thing that I will, next please. Yeah, so the last thing that I would like to mention is that there is this idea of climate resilience, but then there is a very important aspect of social inclusion, which is often missed out in our climate plans and action plans and the city plans that we prepare. And this is what should be taken care of and should be carefully taken care of, because this is often something which all of us know that we should be doing it, but there is really no structured approach towards it, and therefore it's often missed out. So the reason why we would want to include social inclusion, why we would want to stress on social inclusion in climate resilience is because people experience climate change differently. There are differences in adaptive capacity between men and women of the same status. There are differences in adaptive capacity of among men in different status of society. So all these things matter. Their roles and responsibilities, particularly the gendered roles and responsibilities in their households, in their communities, all of this determines how they are impacted by climate change and how they respond to climate change. There is inequality. We need to recognize that there is inequality in rights and resources, in their ability to express their opinions. All of that is actually they determine how you are impacted by climate change. So that actually has a very direct bearing on the achievement of the SDGs also. So if you want to actually implement your leave no one behind principle of the sustainable development goals, then you need to look into social inclusion when you're talking about climate information. Sorry, climate planning. Next, please. So like you can see in this picture, all these people, they might be from the same strata of society. They might be from different strata in society, and they all will feel the impacts of climate change differently. Some health-wise, some would feel it economically, some would feel it socially, some, I mean, they would have hygiene issues, they would have education issues, they would have economic issues. So all these things are actually impacts of climate change, but are felt very differently by different people. Next, please. So when we are talking about climate change and social justice, now the causes and consequences of climate change, they're very deeply intertwined with the patterns of inequality. And what happens is that because of socioeconomic issues, these inequalities, the climate vulnerability gets multiplied. So there is this multiplier effect also. And there is an importance of governance, institutions, of social accountability. If you want to have equitable climate action, if you want your climate measures to actually improve the lot of your entire city, then you need to have systems in place that takes care of those inequalities. And if you do not do that, then your development goals, the development gains that you have is at a risk. There is always a risk of, like now what is happening in Sri Lanka, if you look at it, there are internal riots going on. So now all the progress that the cities had made or development agencies have been working on in the cities, we have also worked over there, and all of that is now at a halt because there are certain inequalities which were not looked at properly. So all these things are actually, you should consider what is your actual objective in development, and you should accordingly plan for it. Next, please. Yeah, so when we are thinking about delivering gender and socially inclusive, climate resilient urban development, what is it that we want? We want social inclusion, we want peace, security, we want equity and empowerment of everyone, we want a climate resilient development. And if we want to have all of these, we need to look at three main things. We need to look at their freedom of expression, whether they are able to express themselves or not, whether they require support. So when we are talking about these shared learning dialogues, when we are talking about stakeholder consultations, how do we take care of all these issues? How do we make sure that all these stakeholders are actually able to present their interventions? I have been to stakeholder consultations where there were 3 women and 50 men. And those 3 women are not able to talk at all because they are not comfortable speaking about anything. And yet at tea time, if I'm interacting with them, then they have a lot of things to say. So it depends also on how you facilitate these consultations. So whether you bring it out, whether you talk to them separately. So all these things need to be considered. The second one was freedom to participate in project activities. Not always is everybody able to participate in their in planning processes, in stakeholder consultations. Half the times I don't go into my RWA consultation because I don't have the time. So that is those are limitations, which are real limitations. People will not always have the time. They might not find it convenient to go to some place and then have a meeting. So these things you will need to consider when you're planning your resilience, action plans. And freedom from violence and harassment. So you have to make sure that a person from a lower class background does not feel out of place when you're talking to him in English and you're having a stakeholder consultations with 10 other people sitting. He or she should not be feeling so out of place that they do not respond, that they do not talk, because that way you are losing out on a section of your people. Either you have different consultations with different people, or you make sure that the facilitation is in such a way that you have everybody included. So these things will need to be considered. So and these are the things which most of us practitioners learn from experience. Basically, when you go into the field, you start talking to people and you see how you can engage with them. But there are certain things which, of course, you will need to keep in mind. Like if you're talking about location and timing, you should make sure that, pregnant women can come. Little children, people with little children, they can also come and attend these meetings. So these are things which, providing toilet access, this is something which is very simple but is often overlooked. So all these things should be looked at when you're actually thinking about having an inclusive climate resilience planning. Next, please. We have a very simple tool to see how we can include social inclusion and gender into climate development or urban development. And these are five. These are not actually steps. These are basically 5 considerations that you should be having. So the first thing is understanding what people need, assessing inclusive solutions. So you have to have solutions which are inclusive, which should take into consideration that there are differences among people. You should take into consideration people's knowledge. There is a lot of knowledge already which is existing among people, and these need to be brought out. These need to be drawn out from people and actually incorporated into the climate plans. You need budget, so you have to obviously commit equity responsive budget. And implementing fair and inclusive solutions, this implementation is also very important. So once your planning is done, even when you're implementing, you should be able to look at different aspects of inclusion. Monitoring equity outcomes. So it's not just the numbers, not the number of persons, not the number of women who have attended the meeting, but actually have the women been benefited because of the action that you have taken. So all of these are main steps or main considerations that you should be having if you want to do social inclusion in urban development. Next, please. I don't want to go into details of each of these steps because I can see that I have been talking for almost half an hour, and I'm sure it's not a good idea to keep talking with so many slides. If you can move on, I will just go into the last few slides. I can share these slides and you can go through them. It's not really a very, these are mostly actually common sense things which should be done. Yeah, so in a nutshell, what we would want people to keep considering is that whenever you're developing your programs, if you're looking at national targets of emissions, improvement in resilience and improvement in social and economic parameters, you should see whether you can get multiple benefits from a single project. So if you can do that, then that is greater value for money. So the budget that you're allocating for your project should be able to look at not just urban development, but should also consider climate, should also consider your social inclusion. So it should be, like for instance, things like giving employment to women or marginalized populations while you're taking a climate action. That is a good way of incorporating both your social and climate angles into the development action. Carefully understand the nuances of social inclusion. It is not easy to make everybody talk in a meeting. It is not easy to actually bring out the inclusivity. It's not easy, and it is hard work. We recognize that, and we know that the efforts have to be made. You can't say that, I have invited everybody and they didn't turn up. That's not going to help. You need to, if they are not turning up, you need to see why are they not turning up, and then you need to make sure that in the next meeting they do actually turn up. So it takes effort, it takes time, these nuances need to be understood. Carefully outline your climate risks, and not just your present risks, but also your future risks, and ensure that your project addresses all these things. And finance, of course, is very important. Finance, without budget, nothing gets done, and without budget, this will also not get done. And monitoring regularly and monitoring openly. You have to be transparent about your monitoring. Unless you unless you identify that, this is where we are going wrong, you will not be able to correct it. And there's nothing wrong with correcting mid-course. If something is not working, change your tack, change your way that you are doing the work. And that's how you will be able to achieve your goal, because the ultimate goal is something which is there, which is already your sustainable development or sustainable urban climate resilient development. This is something that everybody wants. Nobody is opposing that. But if you don't accept that this is not going in the right direction, and you do not change those directions at the right time, then it's not about your project deliverables. It's about your long-term goal or long-term benefit that you want to get for your society. So therefore you really need to be flexible about how you are approaching climate resilience. Yeah, so I will end over here, and I think this is my last slide, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, so if there are questions and comments, please feel free to write to me. Unfortunately, I will be able to stay for only about 10 more minutes, and if there are questions, I can address them.
Yes, ma'am, there is a question by Mohua Graminji. Good afternoon. While the issue in rural area regarding climate change is majorly the lack of awareness, lack access to information, tools and capacities in community to adopt, the urban population is actually lacking with the attitude and willingness for behavioral change and adoption in major. What would be the strategy for the community to adopt and use such innovative tools to promote and result resilience?
So these tools are actually not for the communities. These tools are for the local governments. You can use it at a Gram Panchayat level also. You can use it at a village level also, at a rural level also. And you can use it at a municipal level also. But unfortunately, these tools would not be useful at a community level. However, the concepts of these tools are common. I mean, this is open to everybody. Actually, these concepts should be adopted by everybody and can be adopted by everybody. So this is really, it's a matter of putting your time and effort into it. If you want to engage with the community, it is best if you go through an organization, or if you know anybody who's like really a good community leader, it's good to go through that as well. And we can assist with providing the tool, providing the training on how to use the tool as well. May not be possible for us to obviously reach out to all communities and actually implement the tools with all communities, but yeah, we are happy to help out in these things. But the tool specifically is actually designed for local governments, so for government officials, both urban and rural. It can be used flexibly.
Okay, ma'am. Next question is by Smriti Mishra ji. How is the boundary delineated for vulnerability assessment? Does it include the peri-urban area or limits itself to the municipal limit?
So from our work, we have always limited ourselves to the municipal limits. We can extend it. Like I said, the vulnerability assessment tool that we have is actually, it's flexible enough to include different areas. We have tried it in one place in Nainital, I think, where we included Nainital city as well as surrounding villages, so the district itself. But it depends on how well involved the government officials would be, because the more you dilute the area, if you extend it to peri-urban areas, so the peri-urban areas are actually a no man's land. There is no ownership for that. If that is the case, then for the peri-urban areas, it might be a better idea to go with the communities than with the local governments, because the local government's jurisdiction will end with the municipal area. Whatever actions that they will plan, they can only implement it within their municipal area. They will not be able to implement it in the peri-urban areas unless the peri-urban areas are recognized by the municipality. So yeah, that's the thing.
Okay, ma'am. Tikender C, sir, do you have any other inputs to add on the PPT or discussion, sir?
Well, no, thank you so much, and thank you, Shruti, for this presentation. And let me also inform our participants that it's. I mean, we keep Shruti on high regard because she's in the hospital with her mother, and still she was able
Sorry.
to make this presentation. I mean, we know it's difficult for. I mean, it's not that easy for all of us to and all the best for your mother.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
She's
But I
fine.
think-
She's fine. Thank you.
I'm so happy about that. So, but I think one thing which, apart from the tools that you mentioned, I think one thing which is very important is that where you mentioned about the whole question of inclusiveness, and when you gave this example of Sri Lanka, I think in India also when we talk about the IPCC report, especially the 6th AR and the working group 3, and of course all the 3 working groups, we must treat the IPCC report conjointly with the Oxfam report, that both are actually screaming at us and actually time and again pointing, and this is what I said in the beginning also, that these are not sustainable ways in which we are building our urban development strategies or urban development models. So what needs to be done? I think what Professor Chetan Vaidya also pointed out, that there has to be some integration. Why the left doesn't speak to the right? That means, when we prepare a master plan, I mean, why climate action plan is not part and parcel of that master plan. And let me also inform our participants here, most of the towns I'm telling about do not even have an environment officer, someone who understands the nuances, someone who will just compile the data, give it to the city government. So this is not, forget about primary, secondary, it's not even a tertiary work in most of the municipal corporations that we have handled or that we have worked with. This, apart from a few, very large municipal corporations who have really worked well and who have been able to prepare those plans. So I think the first beginning that has to happen is, and that's what I started from the beginning, is to just assess, to just measure, to just create that atlas in the cities, and the tool that Shruti has just spoken about. Thank you so much. And I do not think that we have a speaker lined up for today after Shruti. So Kanika and Arjun, what I propose is that our participants, if they want to make some comments, or maybe because we still have 2 days to go, tomorrow and the after tomorrow. So what do they feel about, I mean, what necessary changes are to be brought about for tomorrow and the after tomorrow discussions. But I think it's been a fabulous discussion. It's been a fabulous presentation both by Professor Chetan Vaidya and with Shruti Sukh. And by the way, Shruti, you were there in the ICLEI Congress, huh? Were you? Did you go there?
Sorry, with
Were you
ICLEI
there?
Congress, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I was there.
You just come back from another
Yeah.
event. Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much. And Arjun and Kanika, over to you if you have to make some comments, and then probably I'll make the final ones later.
No, sir, let us welcome our next expert. Thank you so much, Shruti ma'am. Kanika?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, ma'am, for taking out your time and sharing your valuable information. Next up among our expert trainers is Professor Sauvanik Roy, Professor, Department of Architecture, Town and Regional Planning, and Founder Director, School of Ecology, Infrastructure, and Human Settlement Management, Indian Institute of Energy, Engineering, Science and Technology, Shukpur. We welcome you, sir.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'll be just sharing my screen.
Sorry, Professor Sauvanik, I was given the impression that Shruti is the last speaker. I'm so sorry. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, no issue.
Oh yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we can see it, sir. You can go full screen. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, can I see the screen?
We can see it, sir. Please go ahead.
Yes, yes. So the title of my presentation is Mainstreaming Disaster Resilience in Indian Cities. In fact, most of the points have been discussed. So it is more like a summary of what have been discussed. And I'll be talking more about the systemic issues and the kind of challenges what we are facing in our cities and the urban areas of India. So we know that Indian urban sector is a paradox because in fact development in India is a kind of paradoxical situation because we are probably the 7th largest country in terms of the geographical area. But in terms of population, it is the 2nd populous country in the world, where we have 1.38 billion population and 450 million urban, which means that the urban population is more than the population of UK and USA taken together. And the many of the Indian states having population almost equal or more than the population of many countries in Europe. So that's the kind of complexity and diversity which we are in, and that has to be considered in when we discuss about this issue of disaster resilience, because of that diversity and complexity, our capacities are also quite different depending on the local circumstances or city circumstances. So this is a very common picture, this flooding, and earlier this picture was more like a picture of maybe once or twice in a season, and now it has become quite frequent, maybe 3 or 4 times in not only in mega cities but also in the metropolitan cities. And India, due to its location and diversity of geographies, because we see that we know that India has a very long coastline of around 8,000 kilometers of coastline. We have a highly unstable mountain systems in the northeastern region, which is also urbanizing fast. We have a large number of biodiversity hotspots like Western Ghats, which has become almost like an epicenter of new cities and urbanization. And all these due to the large diversity of geography, ecologies, they are quite vulnerable, and they are also now the epicenters of urbanization. And many of our mega cities and large cities are low elevation coastal cities, which are at the forefront of climate change and various kinds of natural hazards. So one thing is very clear, that disasters cannot be prevented, but adverse impacts greatly reduced. And what we see also in India, that say in 1999, when Odisha super cyclone happened, 10,000 lives that took away more than 10,000 lives. But almost the similar scale of cyclone happened in 2014 in Filin. It only 50% died, but the amount of property damage and the other infrastructure damage was quite substantial. So due to the climate change situation and the impacts, these disasters could not be prevented, but certainly the adverse impacts could be prevented, which is seen from the early warning systems and disaster management, means the management systems in progress. So lives, the challenges towards life have been taken care of, but certainly not the impacts of this disaster. What is happening all over the globe is that the disaster situation is also urbanizing, because in 1960, the global urban population, out of 3 billion global urban population, 2 billion was rural and 1 billion was urban. And now in 2007, it was 50% urban and rural, and now it is just about 55%. So it is more urban, and obviously the disaster is, and this is the other point which you have to keep in mind, that this 55% of the urban population is only 3% or 3 to 4% of the geographical area of the planet. So we know that what kind of density is there in the urban areas, which is holding such huge infrastructure, which is actually the contributing to the GDP, and which is likely to increase the percentage likely to increase in 68% urban, and the GDP also more than 75% of the GDP. And coming to the urbanization in the global south, as we understand that Asia, Africa, and Latin America are actually the epicenters of urbanization, and this India would like to add around 41 crore population. China is likely to add 25 crore, and Nigeria is also of 20 crore. And if we come to the urban vulnerability of India, what is important to understand that this is likely to contribute 70. Now it is around 66% of the GDP coming from the urban areas, which is likely to increase to 75% of the GDP. And the economic prosperity of the cities, because cities are considered as the engines of urban growth. And these engines of urban growth can only perform if the economic prosperity could be continued without any interruptions. And what we see, there are some figures that the cyclone like Hudhud caused a damage of more than 20,000 crore. The heavy rainfall in Chennai last time caused more than 15,000 crore. So these are the things which are happening. And this is happening with the rampant urban growth and lack of urban planning in Indian cities. So that is also a big challenge that World Bank study, recent World Bank study, which highlights that poor urban planning and management is costing Indian cities between 2.6 billion to 13 billion annually, and around average of 5% of the GDP, which is being at stake because of this. So what we see is the issue is that what I said is the urban complexity and the diversity, and that is coming out of the kind of wave nature of the urbanization. And this is actually urban areas are a complex wave of 4 elements. That is the diversity of people of different income groups and different social status, institutions, diverse kind of institutions which have a very different diverse kind of work culture or administration legacy. We have the infrastructure network and also the information. Now the urban areas can function well if that seamless performance and good performance of all these 4 elements can happen seamlessly without any interruptions. But those mostly become fragile when the disaster happens, and the disaster happens due to the 2 drivers. One is the shock driver, which are the immediate triggers, which are mostly the kind of things what we see, that is the disasters which happen, like the earthquake, the storms, surges, the heat waves, and also the extreme cold, the heat waves and cold waves. In fact, Delhi, what we see now, the extreme heat waves, which is happening for last almost like 15 days. So these are actually the impending shocks, which are more like at a particular point of time for a few days. But what is more important, that these shocks are actually multiplying the existing stresses which are already there, which we can also mention like the pre-existing vulnerabilities in our cities. And those are quite large, considering the kind of political economy in our cities. So these stresses are multidimensional, which is the poverty and inequality, which my previous speakers have already mentioned. Huge poverty and inequality, the homelessness, the inefficient public transport system, and water scarcity, and many others. And particularly the kind of lack of social cohesion in our cities, which have become manifested during the migrant outflux, the migrant out-migration from the cities, who made the cities for last 30 years during the period of globalization, but they found that they do not have any social safety net or security net during the time of the disease outbreaks, and they had to back to their original place of the village, where they had actually their social capital. So where they were supposed to earn the economic, they contribute to the building of the cities, that is not well prepared, so that they could not take care of those people, and they had to come back to their original place. So these shocks will always be there. The problem is that these kind of shocks will always be there. But if the stresses could be addressed at different stages of the city development, then the cities can be resilient, because we cannot avoid what I said, that we cannot avoid natural disaster or climate hazards. But certainly we can take care of the pre-existing vulnerability or stresses, which would ensure the resilience. So according to UN Habitat, resilience is defined as the measurable ability of an urban system with its inhabitant, so that it can continue with all shocks and stresses, and it can positively adapt and transform towards sustainability. And a resilient city is one that develops the capacity of its planning, capacity of its organizing, capacity of its managing the economic activities and its infrastructure access to absorb these future shocks and stresses. And here there are four elements of these urban resilience, which are important to divide and understand. One is certainly the health and well-being of the people, which is how healthy and the people are, and how well their status in their continuous living in the city, how much robust the economy is, how much diverse the economy is, how much social capital the communities are having, so that they can act collectively during the time of the shocks. How accessible are the infrastructure, the water, drainage, sanitation, particularly what became quite relevant in the time of the COVID for constant sanitization. And also the kind of leadership and strategy which is in the city, the leadership of the local self-government or the line departments also, and what kind of strategies they adopt to make the city resilient by focusing on the knowledge which is the different stakeholders are having, which can converge to make the city resilient, and what kind of institutions, the structure of the institutions. So the enhancing the urban resilience depends on two things. One is the understanding of the risk, one understanding the spatial dimensions of the risk, because as I told, that though it is only a small geographical area in terms of the quantitative number, but the size of the population, the density of the space is quite large, and that density is also not homogeneous. So because it is a heterogeneous urban area, and the density is also quite diverse, and depending on the density, the per capita space availability is also quite diverse, per capita water availability is quite diverse. So these understanding of the disaster and its impact, potential impacts on the population, on the infrastructure and economy, that is very important for understanding. And second is that there should be a proper communication channels about the dissemination of this understanding towards the vulnerable communities, because they are also differentially abled in terms of their capacity and access to the infrastructure. The second dimension of this urban resilience, or the pillar of this urban resilience, is the institutions and the legal instruments, because mostly the local bodies are at the first point where they face the disaster and the wrath of the protest of the local people, and they must own the disaster reduction process. But what we know that this entire disaster management thing has been more of an activity at the district level, and also also at the which is actually taken care by the collectors or the district magistrate and other parastatal bodies. So there is not much of ownership in the disaster reduction process. Second is the integration of risk reduction measures in the city and individual level, which depends on the adherence to bylaws. And that is one of the major problems in our cities, that most of our cities, the adherence to bylaws are a chronic problem. And many of these areas which have become more vulnerable or more stressful because the bylaws are not adhered to, and bylaws are many cases being violated in terms of the FAR, in terms of various other access to emergency vehicles, maintaining the minimum open spaces. All these are not being maintained. And the institutions which are taking care of the disaster, they should integrate these risk reduction measures at 3 stages. One is obviously at the pre-disaster stage, which prepares the community through awareness creation among them, and also the convergence of the various line departments in their shared understanding of the how the disaster is happening and how it is creating impact. So a lot of during disaster and post-disaster performance depends on pre-disaster preparedness, both at the community level and also at the authority or the organization level. Second is during disaster, this coordination, huge amount of coordination is required between top between the district administration and also in the local administration in the performance of the rescue and relief measures. And at the post-disaster stage, what is required is how early the entire area and the communities can come back to the original standard, to the pre-disaster, even to a better stage, because if there are certain conditions of pre-disaster stresses which are earlier there, or inequities in the in access to space or access to the various resources were there. So there is a need for change in the existing paradigm, and which is quite understandable, the kind of change which we are discussing in the morning also, that local governance or local government should remain now being dependent on the states and district agencies for disaster management funds. So that is the major problem in the handling the disaster, because the resources have to be mobilized in a very short period, and that's and a lot of bureaucratic hurdles they have to face in release of funds, and that's what we saw in case of COVID situation also. That the problem what came to everybody's attention during the second wave, when there was a huge shortage of life support systems, oxygen cylinders, ventilators, ICUs, and all. So the resource distribution is access to resources is a major problem. The district is the basic unit of planning for disaster, and city is forced to look to the district authorities. So what, apart from the 73rd and 74th management, what it says about the devolution of the function, functionaries and the fund, that some of the vulnerable cities, particularly the vulnerable mega cities, should get the autonomy to introduce some kind of cess or local resources, depending on their level of affordability of the city people. This is absolutely necessary, and this autonomy should be given to the urban local bodies, apart from the planning and management functions. So these are some of the international obligations and also national initiatives. This has already been discussed quite in detail by Professor Chetan, but I am not going into the details of this. But what he has also said, that we have the National Mission for Sustainable Habitat, and we have various national missions like AMRUT, the Smart Cities Mission. So there is hardly any convergence with the National Sustainable Mission for Sustainable Habitat and all these mission guidelines. Similarly, we have Climate Smart Cities Assessment Framework, which is more of an advisory nature and more of a discretionary kind of function in a nature. So this is not kind of statutory function, and in fact, more than 65% of our cities do not have any master plans, and 50% of our cities are also non-statutory cities, like the census towns. Many of them are quite vulnerable to natural hazards. So not only that, many of the statutory towns do not have master plans. The non-statutory towns do not have also any minimum governance structure. Forget about the master plans. So one is that integration of the master plans with these climate adaptation plans, and the second one is that the cities which do not have master plans, they have to start from the scratch. So that is also a much bigger concern of these 50% census towns, which are urbanizing very fast without any structure of governance. So these are our major concerns. So I'll just conclude with this, that the focus should be on empowering the community for disaster resilience, because finally this has to be tackled on a principle of subsidiarity. Otherwise, this would not reach to the actual place where they should reach. And for the principle of subsidiarity to work, there has to be an integration of a macro level and micro level or bottom-up planning, so that there will be all these dimensions can be achieved at the local level or finally at the community level, so that the community. And when I talk about the community, it is not only the community of people, but also the community of the institutions, because not that only the community is poorly endowed in case of a census town or in case of a rural panchayat. It is also the institutions or the departments or the local bodies, even the government departments. They are also poorly endowed or poorly informed and poorly capacity. So both the community of institutions and they actually do not know. Sometimes the disaster happens and their cascading effects to such a complex shape that they do not understand the integrated nature of various sectors. So the understanding of the risk and uncertainty associated with the disaster, there is a need to use lot of amount of local knowledge which are available with the local people, because if an area has an history of local disaster, the people know a lot. So that has to be leveraged. Both the people and also the institutions, they have local knowledge and resources. Social connectedness of the people to be highlighted. They have to be more and empowered, and there should be a kind of proper collaboration between all stakeholders and all communities who should be brought in a common platform to plan on a very immediate basis and organize the resources and finally deliver at the grassroots level, so that finally when the disaster happens, they mobilize the entire structure of governance very quickly, and finally the impact of the disaster is minimized, not only in terms of just saving the lives. Probably the status where we are now, it is saving the lives because of a good early warning system and evacuation. But as we do not have a proper spatial database and the knowledge about the potential impact of the disaster on various infrastructure, we are not able to convert the existing infrastructure or retrofit the existing infrastructure with various kind of climate adaptation measures or various other retrofitting measures. So those are part of the long-term planning. So the situation should be amended in such a way long-term planning can happen at the local level to reduce the impact of disaster. So yeah, that's what for the time being, and I'd be happy to take up questions.
Thank you, sir. We have a question from Tarun Pantji. During the disaster in the hill towns or communities, the authorities respond too slowly. In such a circumstance, we must include local volunteers from locality or region. Therefore, does the disaster management action plan include provisions for such volunteers, or do we need to plan ahead for such inclusion?
Yes, yes, certainly. And in fact, here we know that one of our southern state is doing this. This has been quite well documented. Kerala, in fact, they employ a lot of community volunteers during the time of COVID and during natural disasters also. So they build a good army of local volunteers who have strong local knowledge, and they have actually done a good amount of handholding with the local authorities and the state to actually handle the disaster more effectively, be it a disease outbreak or flood management. Certainly, the disaster force management force can certainly provide the resources, but the manpower would certainly have to come from the local volunteers, and which certainly are the local youths should play the role in mobilizing and handholding in avoiding this problem.
Okay, sir. There is another question by Onkar Puri Advisor. How many district level committee has been formulated to work in this area?
This I do not have the ready answer about, but the problem, what I said is what also Professor Chetan Vaidya also said, that the problem is in India, most of the states, these disaster management plans, except a few states, this is not a statutory activity. Forget about the local level, even at the state level. So this is not a statutory activity. Unless it is a statutory activity, even if some district authorities, they make, formulate these organizations, but that would not have the kind of backing from the government to make the resources available, which will not have the legal backing. So this is important in India, to make it as a legal tool to handle the disaster by making plans and making these authorities or institutions as a legal binding for the various states, districts, and also the local bodies.
There is another question by Isha Bhatnagarji. Hello, sir. Thank you for the lecture. Since we have talked about resilience in 3 lectures, how are we distinguishing climate resilience, urban resilience, and disaster resilience? Aren't these streams working towards the same goal, that is to build self-sufficient, resourceful, and robust city?
Yeah. So actually, what I said also, that the climate change is a continuous phenomenon, and the disasters are more like immediate shocks. So these are triggers. The disasters more like a trigger. So certainly, if we have the pre-existing vulnerabilities, and climate change is likely to continue, and here we have to consider about the mitigation measures, the complementarity between mitigation, adaptation, all these, and adaptation has to be at the core of our master plans, certainly. But even then, and this should address the immediate shocks, that is the disasters. Sometimes these are climate induced, sometimes these are other kind of disasters like these disease outbreaks or other kind of problems. So though this may be different in some cases, but finally the impact should be on the people and the infrastructure, which is likely to have a huge impact on the long-term sustenance of the community and also for the state. So my point is, though they may be different, but we have to see this in terms of that which areas are there are pre-existing stress, and if we can work on those pre-existing stress or vulnerable areas, spatially we can map them and communicate them to the local community through various kind of technical tools like GIS and all. Various kind of tools are now quite easily available. There are participatory GIS and many other tools are now means the technology tools, working with the people, we have participatory GIS. So those are quite useful to constantly engage with the local community and also to the local organizations, departments, to understand the disaster and communicate. So that's why I told that understanding the disaster spatially, the variations, and communicating them effectively, so that finally they understand that what is to be done at their level. So the actions are also at two levels. One is at the three levels rather. One is at individual level, one is at the community level, and the other is at the city level or at the regional level. So all these actions can happen if the understanding is universal and also communication is also reaches the actually to the grassroots level properly.
Thank you, sir. Tekendra sir, do you have any points, or do you want to include any other viewpoints?
Well, I do not think so that I have, but there is another question from Ujjwal Gurdasmi. Can you take that?
Oh, yes, sir. The implementation of the Disaster Management Act brings certain state exceptions that empower state authorities, such as the district collector, to take coercive actions against the community and holds no accountability for their actions. Coercive actions taken by DC during the lockdown. How could make the DMA be more accountable and the decision-making authority could be more inclusive, such as including local elective representatives to have more accountability?
There is
Yeah, Tikendra ji.
yes, go ahead, sir.
No, I do not have a very specific answer to this, because this probably requires the obligations of the state government people. But one point which I feel is that disaster management is not a policing activity, and I also believe this, that this is not something and law and order issue, which Professor Amartya Sen has also mentioned during the day, that this is not something because it required some early preparedness, what we have done till the situation what has been arrived. Certainly, this is not a kind of a policing activity or law and order activity, because you have to take the consent of the people finally to implement anything. And if the people are like, for example, the migrant worker exodus, what we found, that happened because they could not stay back in the cities. There was no support given in many of the states. The vehicles were not organized. So they came down to the streets. And what we saw, there are various policing actions and many other actions. And that really became a kind of disaster, a social, I should say it's a social disaster, where what we saw in India. So that should not have happened. So I personally think that it is not a kind of a issue to be considered as a law and order or policing activity. That maybe in some extreme cases that may be deployed, but that's not as an institutional measure. I don't think that would really serve any purpose.
There is one more question.
Prabhakar Kumar Prajapati sir has asked, where urban governance is not functional, how can a disaster management plan be prepared at the local level?
Yeah, this is a question actually. My suggestion is, if there is no governance structure, probably it is better to work with the community and work with the existing traditional knowledge which they have, and what still many of the forest communities and other areas in the Himachal and other places. The problem is that we actually impose a kind of external development model to them, and so that their autonomy in their local management is destroyed. Autonomy in their local resource utilization is destroyed, and all that. So what we saw, that even people with Forest Rights Act, they do not violate the harvesting rules and all. So I think where there is no governance, state governance structure is available, better to work with the traditional knowledge of the people in the remote areas, in the hills, in the forest areas. And there, I don't think there is much of a problem. The problem happens when the lot of external resources and comes into the picture, and the place is more integrated with the market, and local people lose their voice in the development. And there, obviously, we need external agencies and institutions and governance structure which can strike a balance between the public interest and also development and environment.
Shakun Sharma ji has asked the question, sir, how the use of local knowledge can be applied in scientific and objective ways?
Yeah, there are, in fact, we know that there are various, for example, we work in Sundarban's area. Okay, Sundarban is a disaster-prone area, all we know. And what we saw, many of the government projects, when they build the cyclone shelter and many other things, many other these structures, they use huge amount of concrete, brick, and all these things. What we, on the contrary, what we, and they things which are highly energy consuming and also high carbon footprint materials with huge heap of concrete being dumped over there. But we also saw a large number of community or NGO organized NGO developed shelters which use local resources like bamboo and local materials. So probably we have to find that what is the kind of local availability of resources, materials, local skill, and probably there lies the answer, that we have to really take the help of local materials and resources if the modern materials are not available over there. And probably that there we find the answer, that if we do not use them commercially, they can really do the marvel.
Shailendra Singh ji has raised your hand. Would you like to speak, sir? You're muted.
Meanwhile, Tikender sir, would you like to add anything? Interesting questions for you also.
Well, I would like to make 2 points here. Or is Shailendra there? So maybe Panika, should I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Sure, you can go ahead.
Okay, so the first point is that why are we discussing cities as a separate entity? Because actually they are not acknowledged the way they should have been. Despite the fact that we have some institutional framework in which we talk about cities climate action plan, but still a long way we have to go about. And this long way, when we talk about to go about, speaks also about the dialectics and the connections and the interconnections between our national, state, and the city governments. And there are many reasons for that. They are political, they are sociological, and of course, there are economic reasons, because cities also happens to be one of the largest areas where this accumulation of capital takes place. So I think it's a continuous evolving process and exercise. But the silver lining, according to me, is that the way the developmental strategies are being built are completely unsustainable. So therefore, we have to go back to the people, and what Professor Roy was also saying. The entire question of participation of the people is, I think, very quintessential for the success of these action plans. And as Professor Chetan Vaidya also pointed out, actually emphasis has to be laid on adaptation, not to miss the point that mitigation is also equally important, what Sunita Narayan also wrote recently in one of articles. So having said that, I think it's really a long way to go, because that's what we are experiencing. I mean, whether we are in the institution or we are outside the institution, as a citizen, as a resident, I mean, we are there facing all. We are facing the brunt of all this. So I think this has been a very interesting discussion. That's one. The second part that comes to the integration between local knowledge and scientific inputs. And I think this interconnection also, and I'll cite some of the anecdotal experiences that we get from Himachal Pradesh. Now, in the recent past, and I think this is also happening in Uttarakhand, we are experiencing lots and lots of forest fires. Of course, one of the reasons happens to be climate change, long spell of dry period when we don't have rains. But at the same time, this is also a very protracted, prolonged exercise that has happened in the Himalayas. And I curse the World Bank for that, for the simple reason, because in the 1960s and 70s, under the project of planting green, what happened is that instead of my traditional and conventional wisdom, whereby the local communities used to plant mixed forests, where you have very less forest fires, actually pine was introduced. Not that pine was not there earlier, but pine was planted rampantly all across the Himalayas. And if you find the deadly fires that are taking place are the places where pine has been planted. So, I mean, I don't want to go further. I mean, what that has, why that was done. But at the same time, the community resilience was also there because they had rights in the forest, what we call the Vazi village, what we call the conventional rights for timber, fodder, and for various other reasons. But since post-1980s, when nationalization of forests took place, there was massive alienation of the forest traditional communities also taking place. Still, Himachal practices one of the old practice called the keeping the forest rakhas. So when we have a forest fire, these forest rakhas are people from the communities, from the village, were the first ones to blow a whistle. But in the last few decades, I would point out, because of the alienation that has taken place and because of the aggrandizement of the Indian state, or for example, I mean, when I say the Indian state, the system per se is so huge that the forests have been completely controlled by our state structures, and the people have been ridiculed and minusculed in this entire process of managing the forests. Forests cannot be managed from the top; they have to be managed by the people, and it is this very reason, I think, which leads to massive forest fires and hardly any community participation in checking those forest fires. Your forest tenders, I mean, your fire tenders can't go to the forest because there are no roads in the forest, So there were these communities who were part and parcel. I think we have to revisit those strategies and bring that conventional wisdom, bring that traditional wisdom back to the fore, and then link it to the scientific evidence. Now we have the evidence that pine is a disaster for the Himalayas. And now we are going back to planting mixed forests, even in the urban ecology where we are planting, trees of various species, not just pine. So I think that's all, Arjun. I would just to understand this discussion. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, Karnik.
Thank you, Professor Savanik Roy, sir, and Tikender, sir, for taking your time and enlightening us. Now we have Harshit Sharma, young professional NIDM, for providing a small presentation for us. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much once again. And first, I would like to congratulate IMPRI for organizing a training program on such an important topic in collaboration with NIDM. So I would like to share my PPT first. Is it visible?
Yes. Go full screen. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Is it moving, sir?
No, it's not getting full screen, Harshit.
But in my system, it is in full screen, sir. Wait.
Just try to share again. Stop share and share again. Now share again. Okay, not full screen. Okay, Harshit, go ahead like this only, no issue.
Okay, sir. So, dear participants, today I will give a brief information about the role of urban local bodies in urban risk resilience. So, first we will start with the concept of the urban local bodies, what they are. So the system of municipalities or urban local governments was constitutionalized through the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, which was enacted in 1992. And the provisions in this amendment are included in Part 9A, which came into force on June 1st, 1993. So therefore, it gave a constitutional foundation to the local self-government units in urban areas. Towns and cities contribute substantially to the economic development of the country, and these urban centers also play an important role, support role in the development of the rural hinterlands. To keep this economic transformation in line with needs and realities at the grassroots level, it is necessary that the people and their representatives are fully involved in the planning and implementation of the programs at the local level. All over the world, a rapid urbanization is taking place, we all know. And according to World Bank, by the year 2025, 80% of the world population will be residing in urban areas. And annual droughts, flash floods, avalanches, landslides makes 25 of the 35 states and union territories disaster prone in our country. And according to a recent MHA's publication, we lose about 2% of our GDP on an average to the disasters. Now we will talk about what is the interrelation between the civil engineers and disaster management, because most of the employees in various sectors, you may see that they have the mentality that I am not engaging in the disaster management sector. How can I help? What should we do? So for the in the cities, in the urban areas, in the cities, you all can notice that the urban planning is most important part for disaster mitigation, for mitigating any of the disasters. So the planning part, the structural establishment basically by the civil engineers, so they play very important role in the initial phase, in the disaster prone areas. So the majority of the damage in the event of the disaster is due to improper city planning and failure of structural design, poor infrastructural facilities, ignorance of building norms, low quality substitutes of building materials, and lack of site investigations. So these are a few reasons. And a structural engineer, a geotechnical engineer, a surveyor, city planner, and a construction manager, all different types of civil engineers, have an active role to play in disaster management and mitigation. City planners must keep in mind the vulnerability of a specific area to disasters. Specifications and guidelines should be issued for construction activities in these areas. Third-party checks and by the local authorities for the compliance of the project with all the requirements must be conducted before issuing the building use permission, and also regular investigations should be conducted after the completion. So as our previous speakers have also talked about how can community, what is the role of the community in disaster risk reduction, in mitigating the impact of any of the disasters. Basically the role of the community, the role of the volunteers. One of the participants have also asked about this question: how can we engage the volunteers in disaster management sector? So for this, I would like to cite here one example, the example of the Odisha state. As you all can see on the screen, that the Odisha state have been highlighted in various news channels by its preparation for disaster risk reduction and for various disasters, which I will explain later. So the eastern state of Odisha in India, situated along the coast of the Bay of Bengal, frequently suffers from cyclones, floods, and occasional tsunamis. Hence, it has often been referred to as the disaster capital of the country. However, in early August 2020, it was two coastal villages in Odisha, Venkatrayapur in Ganjam district and Naulia Sahi in Jagatsinghpur district, which earned the recognition of being tsunami ready from the UNESCO Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, making India the first country in the Indian Ocean region to establish such high levels of disaster preparedness at the community level. So we can see, we can notice the role of the community in Odisha state. Odisha has recurrently been in the news in recent years for the exemplary way in which it has managed to cope with the disasters that have struck its coast and affected its people. Community-based disaster risk reduction is at the very heart of Odisha state's approach towards disaster management. And one of the central themes of the state disaster management plan states that community-based disaster preparedness is the key to effective disaster management. This is because during any disaster, communities are always the worst affected and the first responder. And community participation in the process of disaster management therefore ensures local ownership, addresses local needs, and promotes a culture of mutual help to prevent and minimize the damage due to any of the disaster. As India is increasingly trying to develop a system of community-based disaster risk reduction and management in the country, it is important to understand how Odisha has tackled recent disasters with the community at the forefront. The distinguishing features of Odisha's way of disaster management, which has earned its global appreciation, therefore need to be identified. The investigation in investing in community preparedness, learning from the past. As we all know, our for the same, our Honorable Prime Minister has also shared the 10-point agenda during the Asian Ministerial Conference AMC-DRR held in 2016. He has given the agenda item number 9, what it talks about. So make use of every opportunity to learn from disasters, and to achieve that there must be studies on the lessons after every disaster. So Odisha state is also doing work on this theme and this agenda. They have successfully done this thing. The vulnerable communities have been at the front line of the disaster management operations in Odisha on multiple occasions due to the training they receive from governmental and non-governmental agencies. Community preparedness, however, is not limited to their participation in disaster management activities alone. It also involves the effective and active cooperation of the community members with the local and national disaster management authorities. Lessons from past disasters are also kept in mind while designing prevention and response strategies. In 1999, Odisha had witnessed a super cyclone which led to the loss of 10,000 lives. The unfortunate experience propelled the state to build multi-purpose cyclone shelters along its 480-kilometer long coastline, equipped with community kitchens and life-saving equipments. The shelters offer all services. The shelters offer all services that are required during emergencies and have allotted announcement vehicles. And some buildings have also been designated as cyclone shelters so that evacuees do not get scattered at different locations but can stay within their communities. Based on an early tsunami experience when Sweta intruded up to 1.5 kilometers into the land, the government also identified 328 villages as tsunami prone and undertook measures to enhance their disaster preparedness. The 2 villages which have been declared tsunami ready under the Indian Ocean Tsunami Ready program of UNESCO, a community performance based program, are amongst these identified villages. The preparedness the village communities exhibited when the UNESCO team visited in December 2019 met the parameters of this program, which ranged from having community tsunami risk reduction plans to designated tsunami hazard zones, having easily understandable evacuation maps, and annually conducted tsunami community exercise, and a reliable means to receive official tsunami alerts around the clock. Plans are afoot to have one such model village in each of the state's 6 coastal districts. So the active, next we will discuss the active role of community in evacuation operations in Odisha state. Disaster preparedness at the community level is conducive for speedy dissemination of alerts and mobilization of the people necessary for effective implementation of evacuation operations, one of the primary reasons behind Odisha's success in disaster management. As the word when puts it, Odisha has a good community outreach system through which people can be contacted on the time. There is a network of 450 cyclone shelters, and each shelter has a maintenance committee trained in rescue and relief activities. Through a network of these shelters and committees, the state has involved the entire committee, making it easy to disseminate warnings and evacuate people. Recent disasters bear testimony to Odisha's prowess in conducting evacuation operations. During Cyclone Amphan, one of the strongest cyclones ever to have been recorded in the Bay of Bengal, near 2 lakh people were evacuated in the state. Cyclone preparations began as soon as the alerts were issued by the Indian Meteorological Department (IMD), and restoration efforts were undertaken on a war footing, so that by the time the cyclone steered away from Odisha towards West Bengal, more than 85% of the power restoration work was already done. Heading the central team to assess the post-Amphan damage in Odisha, Joint Secretary of Union Home Ministry, Shri Prakash, stated that community involvement in the process of disaster management had been one of the achievements of the Odisha government. Prior to Amphan, Odisha had already received accolades for its evacuation operations. Keeping in mind the goal of zero casualty, Odisha carried out one of the biggest evacuation operations in human history, moving around 1.2 million people just before Super Cyclone Fani in 2009. The United Nations had lauded the way in which the local authorities accommodated the evacuees in over 4,000 shelters, including 800 ones especially designed to withstand cyclones. Nearly 1 million people were also evacuated when cyclone Fani struck in 2013. Post Fani, the United Nations had recognized Odisha's preparedness as a global success story and made plans to use it as a model for other cities. So the futuristic vision. Now we will talk about the futuristic vision of Odisha state. An essential features of community-based disaster management is reducing the community's risk or vulnerability to natural disasters. To accomplish this, long-term plans are necessary with an eye on potential dangers such as climate change, which threatens to increase the intensity or frequency of natural disasters in the future. The Odisha State Disaster Management Plan therefore seeks to integrate disaster risk reduction with climate change adaptation. The objective is to inculcate disaster risk resilience within the communities so that they are not only prepared but can also resist, absorb, accommodate, and recover. Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has recently expressed an interest to partner with the Odisha government in recognition of the state's practices of disaster management as a model for other states. At last, we can state that Odisha is an example of being vulnerable yet resilient, and the salient features of its disaster management approach thus offer lessons for the whole country. So thank you very much. Thank you very much once again for giving me this opportunity. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Now we have Dr. Shweta Vaidyadas for giving important training and certificate related announcements. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Kanika. So this is an announcement to all the participants. First of all, thank you so much for participating with us, for being with us for a bit of more time, which was scheduled. I understand that some of you might be having some data issues, as I can see in the chat box, but nevertheless, I'm sure that you got to learn a lot of things from this very informative session that we had today. And also tomorrow and day after tomorrow, we are going to have similar kind of sessions, so be with us. But before we leave for today, I will like to tell you few very important things. That is, first thing is, whomsoever has joined directly and has not registered in NIDM portal, please register into the portal. In chat box many times I've pasted the link also, so you can go there and you can register yourself, because if you do not register, then you will not get the certificate. Then second point is, make sure when you are registering, the mail ID that you are using for registration, you should always use that same mail ID for joining. And whenever you are joining, maybe the system is asking for your full name. So in that case, you can give your name completely, because, if you don't give your name, or if you simply write ABCD or Del or something, then, that name itself comes into your certificate. So make sure you are giving your proper name, because the name that you give here while joining and while registering, that same name will go for your certificate. Because I'll just be downloading your attendance and I'll be uploading that. So that name itself will go into your certificate. So, and it is a system generated thing. I cannot do anything into that. Also, I do not know your name, so I cannot just write your name if you have written some ABCD or 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Also, please make sure that you attend the 3 days program for 80% of the total time, because that makes you eligible for the certificate. And also, when the program is over, 3 days program is over, then within 2 days we try to download the attendance and upload that into the website. So within 2 days you will be able to download your certificate, not before that. And when you are going to download your certificate, you will see that there is something written as feedback. So there itself you have to click, and then you have to give your feedback in that website when you are trying to download your certificate. So if you do not fill that feedback form, then automatically you will not receive your certificate. Okay. So these are the things that I wanted to share. So please make sure you follow all of this, because if you fail any of these, then you will not get your certificate. So make sure you follow all these steps. And if you have any problem in understanding, then tomorrow again you can let me know in the chat box. Anyways, I'm going to paste this information once again in the chat box, so that you can get to know what exactly you have to do. Okay, thank you so much everyone for joining with us, and hope to see you tomorrow and day after also. Thank you so much.
As we have come to the end of day 1 of a 3-day online training program, I, Karnika Arun, researcher at IMPRI Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to thank. This topic for the discussion for this training program is making Indian cities disaster and climate change resilient towards responsive and actionable urban planning, policy and development, organized by IMPRI and NIDM. We are grateful to Professor Anil K. Gupta, Sikandar Singh Panwar, Professor Chetan Vaidya, Medoshruti Sadhukan, Professor Savanik Roy, and Ashish Sharma for his presentation. Thank you, participants who have raised pertinent questions and have participated. We're thankful if you're watching us on YouTube or later on Facebook Live. We welcome you tomorrow for our day 2 session by our distinguished experts. I hope you continue to join into our future web policy talks, IMPRIs, web policy talk and web policy learning. Thank you all. Have a good day.